The first visitors. The galaxy had seen many strange worlds, but none like Earth. Far from the reaches of the galaxy's well-known civilizations, Earth had always been a mystery, a forbidden planet on many star maps. The Zirak, a race of explorers and conquerors, had ventured far beyond their borders, scanning distant stars for new worlds to conquer or study. But Earth had always been an enigma. It all started when the Zirak sent their scout ships across the stars, following a faint signal, a strange energy reading that seemed to pulse with life. It was an anomaly, something unlike anything they'd encountered before. No other species had managed to decipher its source, and no one knew what it meant. But the Zirak were always curious, always hungry for new knowledge. They had to know what lay in the depths of this mysterious world. Captain Vectol, a leader known for his strength and keen mind, sat in the command chair of the flagship Zelither, gazing at the holographic star map. The map was filled with coordinates of planets they had visited, some thriving, others lifeless. But Earth was different. The energy signature coming from this small blue planet was unlike any other they had encountered. It beckoned them, drawing them in like a moth to a flame. "We are nearing the coordinates," Vectol's voice echoed through the ship's comm system. "Prepare the landing teams. Let's see what this world has to offer." The Zirak were a tall, intimidating species, their bodies covered in armored scales, their eyes glowing with an eerie light. They were warriors by nature, but their curiosity often outweighed their thirst for conquest. As the ship descended toward Earth, their sensors began picking up even more unusual readings. Gravity fluctuated erratically, the atmosphere was dense, and the terrain seemed to shift in strange ways. "Something is wrong," Vectol muttered under his breath. "Maintain course. We must land." The ship broke through Earth's atmosphere, shaking with the pressure of re-entry. Outside, the clouds churned, creating a violent storm that seemed to welcome their arrival. Lightning crackled in the sky, and thunder rumbled as if the planet itself was warning them. But the Zirak did not hesitate. Their ship's advanced technology protected them from the storm, and they pressed on, descending into the thick forests of Earth. As the ship's landing gears touched the ground, a sense of unease swept over the crew. The moment the hatch opened, the air felt different, thick and heavy. The temperature seemed to fluctuate wildly, from icy cold to scorching heat in a matter of seconds. Vectol stepped out first, his armored boots crunching the soil beneath him. The rest of the crew followed, their weapons ready, scanning the area. The forest around them was dense, its towering trees unlike anything the Zirak had ever seen. The leaves seemed to move unnaturally, shifting even when there was no wind. The sounds of the forest were unsettling. Whispers in the wind, animals making noises that didn't quite belong to any species they knew. It felt wrong. The Zirak were accustomed to exploring strange planets, but Earth was different. This world did not seem to welcome them. "Stay alert," Vectol commanded. "We are not alone." The Zirak began to spread out, carefully stepping through the underbrush, their eyes scanning the surroundings for any signs of danger. They had encountered hostile species before, but nothing like this. Earth felt alive in a way that was beyond natural. As they moved deeper into the forest, one of the Zirak explorers, Korin, stumbled and fell. His armor scraped against the ground as he quickly pushed himself back up, but his face was pale. "Captain," Korin said, his voice trembling, "I saw something in the trees." The others paused, their weapons raised, ready for anything. The feeling in the air grew heavier, the hairs on the back of their necks standing on end. Something was watching them. "Was it an animal?" Vectol asked. "No," Korin replied, his eyes wide with fear. "It was something else, something intelligent." The team stood still, waiting, listening for any sound that would confirm Korin's words. But the forest was eerily quiet now, the strange noises fading into an unsettling silence. They had been on countless planets, faced terrifying creatures, but nothing compared to the feeling Earth gave them now. Vectol motioned for the team to regroup. "This planet is dangerous," he said. "We're not alone, and we must be cautious. Let's find the source of the energy signature and leave quickly." The team pressed on, each step feeling more difficult than the last. They ventured deeper into the forest, but the further they went, the stranger the world became. The trees seemed to grow taller, the shadows darker, and the temperature more erratic. The Zirak had faced many challenges in their time, but something about Earth made them feel small, insignificant. It was as if this world had been waiting for them, and it wasn't sure whether it wanted them to stay. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the trees, followed by the unmistakable sound of something large moving through the forest. The Zirak turned, weapons drawn, ready to defend themselves. But they couldn't see anything. The forest was too thick, the shadows too dark. Vectol clenched his fists, his mind racing. This wasn't just a planet. It was a living, breathing entity, one that didn't take kindly to visitors. "We need to go back to the ship," he ordered. "This place is too dangerous. We can't risk further exploration without more information." But as they turned to head back, the growl grew louder, closer, and the shadows seemed to shift once more. They had underestimated Earth, and now they were beginning to realize just how wrong they had been. The Zirak had faced many dangers in their time: hostile planets, powerful enemies, and even creatures that could tear through their armor. But nothing compared to the feeling Earth gave them now. It was not just the strange energy readings or the unpredictable environment. It was the presence, something unseen, something waiting. Captain Vectol led his team back toward the ship, their steps careful, their weapons ready. The forest around them remained unnervingly silent, but the feeling of being watched had not faded. If anything, it had grown stronger. Koran, still shaken from what he had seen, kept glancing over his shoulder. "Captain," he whispered, "I swear something is moving with us." Vectol did not respond immediately. He had noticed it too. Every time they took a step forward, there was a faint sound behind them, a rustling of leaves, a shifting of shadows. But whenever they turned, there was nothing. "We keep moving," Vectol finally said. "Stay close, stay alert." The team pressed on, their armored boots crunching against the damp earth. The trees around them seemed to close in, their massive trunks twisting in unnatural ways. The air grew heavier, charged with something invisible, something wrong. Then, without warning, the growl returned. Low, deep, dangerous. It came from the darkness between the trees, where the shadows moved unnaturally. The Zirak warriors immediately raised their weapons, forming a defensive circle. "Scan the area," Vectol barked. One of the soldiers, Raltis, activated his visor's thermal sensors, scanning the forest for any heat signatures. His eyes widened. "Captain, there's something there," he said, his voice unsteady. "It's big. It's watching us." Before Vectol could respond, the creature moved. It was fast, too fast, a blur of motion from the shadows, followed by a sharp, unnatural screech. A gust of wind rushed past them, and in the blink of an eye, Koran was gone. The team froze, eyes darting around in panic. "Koran!" Vectol shouted. No response. The silence that followed was worse than the attack itself. Raltis frantically scanned the area again. "No heat signature," he whispered. "It's like he vanished." That was impossible. Nothing vanished like that. The Zirak had advanced technology, equipment that could track even the most well-camouflaged creatures. But whatever was hunting them now did not follow the rules of nature as they understood it. Vectol clenched his fists. This mission had turned into something far worse than they had expected. Earth was not just dangerous. It was wrong. Then, a voice echoed through their comms. Weak, desperate. "Captain, help." It was Koran. His voice was filled with pain, fear. "Hold on, Koran," Vectol said, turning to his crew. "We find him. Now." The Zirak warriors followed the signal from Korin's communicator, moving quickly through the dense forest. The growling noise followed them, shifting from one side to the other, as if something was circling them. Then they saw him. Korin lay on the ground, barely breathing. His armor was torn, his face pale. His hands clutched his side, where deep claw marks had ripped through his scales. Vectol knelt beside him. What happened? Korin's eyes darted around wildly. It wasn't an animal, he gasped. It was something else, something intelligent. A chill ran through Vectol. Intelligent. That meant this was not just a predator hunting for food. This was something worse. Raltis looked around, his weapon shaking in his hands. "Captain, we need to get back to the ship. Now." Vectol nodded. "Move. Fast." They lifted Korin and started running, no longer caring about caution. The presence in the shadows had made its intentions clear. This was not their planet, and it did not want them here. As they ran, the growling followed, closing in from all sides. Then the whispers began. Soft, eerie voices echoed through the trees, speaking in a language the Zirak did not recognize. It was not natural. It was not right. The ship was close now. They could see the lights glowing through the trees, just a little further. Then something stepped out from the darkness. A figure, tall, human. But something was wrong. The eyes glowed red in the darkness. The body seemed distorted, shifting like a shadow, yet solid like a warrior. It opened its mouth, and the growl that followed shook them to their core. Vectol raised his weapon, his hand steady despite the terror in his gut. "Run," he shouted. The Zirak warriors sprinted toward the ship as the figure lunged forward. Earth was not just a death world. It was something much worse. And now they had its full attention. The Zirak warriors sprinted toward their ship, their boots pounding against the damp earth. Behind them, the monstrous figure in the darkness moved like a shadow, its glowing red eyes locked onto them. The whispers around them grew louder, turning into inhuman, guttural voices, speaking a language that did not belong in this world. Korin, barely conscious, groaned in pain as Vectol and Raltis dragged him forward. "Faster," Vectol barked. "We're almost there." Their ship, the Varthuk, stood ahead, its metallic hull shining under the dim moonlight. The entrance ramp was still down. Safety was only a few meters away. But then, a deafening roar. A force like a hurricane slammed into them from behind, sending Vectol and his warriors crashing to the ground. Dirt and leaves scattered in the air as the alien soldiers groaned, struggling to regain their footing. Raltis turned, raising his weapon. "What in the void is that thing?" The figure in the darkness stepped forward. Now, in the dim light, they could see it more clearly. It looked human, but it wasn't. Its skin rippled like shifting shadows, its movements unnatural, as if it existed between reality and something else. Its glowing eyes never blinked. Then it spoke. "Leave." The voice was not one, but many. A chorus of whispers and growls, layered on top of each other, ancient and powerful. The Zirak warriors froze. They had fought terrifying creatures across the galaxy, but never had something spoken directly to them like this. Vectol, despite the fear clawing at his mind, stood tall. "We mean no harm," he called out. "We are explorers." The figure tilted its head, a slow, deliberate movement. Then it moved, not like a normal being. One moment it stood in the shadows. The next it was inches away from Raltis. Raltis barely had time to scream. The creature grabbed him, lifting him into the air with unnatural strength. The Zirak warrior thrashed, his claws scraping against the monster's skin, but it had no effect. The thing did not even react. "Raltis." Vectol aimed his weapon, but it was too late. The figure opened its mouth, and darkness poured out. A chilling black mist wrapped around Raltis like tendrils, seeping into his eyes, his mouth. The warrior's screams turned into strangled gasps. Then, his body went limp. The figure dropped him. Raltis hit the ground, unmoving. His eyes were completely black. Vectol and the others staggered back in horror. Koran, barely conscious, choked out a whisper. We were never supposed to be here." The creature took a step forward. This was no ordinary human. This was something ancient, something deadly, and it had given them a warning. Leave. But now, it was too late for that. Vectol grabbed Koran and ran. Get on the ship. Now. The Zirak warriors didn't hesitate. They sprinted up the ramp, hitting the emergency close button as they rushed inside. The metal doors sealed shut just as the creature reached the base of the ramp. For a moment, there was silence. Then, a loud metallic bang. The ship shook violently. The creature had struck it with its bare hands, leaving a dent in the reinforced hull. Inside, Vectol and his crew rushed to the control room. Lift off. Now. The pilot, hands shaking, activated the thrusters. The ship roared to life, engines burning bright. Outside, the creature stood still, watching. Then, just as the ship began to rise, it smiled. A deep, chilling grin that should not have been possible. Vectol's blood ran cold. That was not the smile of a defeated enemy. It was the smile of something that let them leave, on purpose. The ship shot into the sky, leaving Earth's surface behind. But Vectol knew they hadn't escaped. They had just become part of something much, much worse. The Varthuk hurtled through space, its engines roaring as it escaped Earth's orbit. Vectol gripped the edges of his chair, his claws digging into the metal. His breathing was uneven. Something was wrong. Koran, still weak from the attack, sat against the wall, eyes wide with fear. "We made it out," he muttered. "We actually made it out." But no one celebrated, because Raltis was still lying in the corner of the ship, unmoving. His eyes, once fierce and sharp, were now completely black. His chest rose and fell, but he did not blink, did not move, did not speak. Vectol swallowed hard. "Raltis?" He approached slowly. No response. Vectol reached out. Then Raltis' hand snapped up and grabbed his wrist. The captain staggered back, his heart pounding. Raltis sat up in a single, unnatural motion. His body seemed stiff, as if he was being puppeteered by invisible strings. Then he spoke, but it was not his voice. "You should not have come." The words were layered, echoing, spoken by many voices at once. The air around them grew colder. The crew backed away in horror. Raltis turned his head slowly, his black eyes locking onto each of them. His lips curled into a disturbing, empty grin. Vectol's blood ran cold. This isn't possible." Koran shook his head violently. "We need to get him to medical. Maybe the neural stabilizers can fix whatever is wrong." But before anyone could move, the lights flickered. The ship trembled, as if something was moving through it. Then, a whisper. Low, cold. "You cannot run." The ship's main console fizzled with static. The pilot, panicked, tried to reset the controls, but the screens were filling with strange symbols that were not from any known language. And then, the sensors picked up movement. Outside the ship, something was following them. Vectol turned to the pilot. "Full speed. Get us as far from Earth as possible." The pilot's claws tapped frantically on the control panel. "I'm trying, but something is." The ship lurched violently. The warning alarms blared through the cabin. Proximity alert. They weren't alone. Koran turned to the main viewport, and what he saw made his mind go numb. It was there. Outside, floating in the void of space, was the same figure they had encountered on Earth. But that was impossible. No creature, no matter how powerful, could survive in space unprotected. No life form could move without propulsion. Yet there it was. Its glowing red eyes stared directly at them. Vectol's voice was barely a whisper. "How?" Corin took a step back. "This isn't just a human, is it?" No one answered. Because deep down, they already knew. This thing was not human. It was something else. And it was coming for them. The Varthuk shook violently as something outside slammed into its hull. The crew scrambled to hold on, fear spreading through the ship like wildfire. Vectol's claws gripped the control panel, his face twisted in a mixture of disbelief and terror. "It's still out there," he gasped, staring at the viewport. Corin rushed up to the controls, his eyes wide with panic. Why isn't the ship responding? Why won't it? Before he could finish, the ship lurched again. A violent wave of energy passed through the Varthuk, causing the lights to flicker in an eerie strobe pattern. The low hum of the engines cut off, leaving only the sound of breathless crew members and the pounding of their hearts. The crew was trapped. Raltis was still in the corner, staring blankly, his once dominant form now eerily still. But his eyes were wide open. They didn't blink. And then, suddenly, they shifted, focusing on the pilot in the front. "We're not alone anymore." The words came from Raltis' mouth, but they didn't sound like his voice. They were heavy, laced with something otherworldly. Corin's heart skipped a beat. He turned to Vectol. "What does it mean? What's happening to him?" Vectol's claws dug into the edges of the console. "I don't know." His voice was hoarse, his usual strength faltering. "But this is no ordinary disease or infection." Raltis' eyes were now glowing, a sickly green that made the air around them feel oppressive. "The thing is coming." Raltis' voice twisted and shifted as though someone else was speaking through him. "It has always been here. It never left. You cannot escape it. It is in your blood now." The crew froze. Vectol's eyes widened as he connected the dots. The creature on Earth, it was connected to Raltis. "What is it?" Corin whispered, almost afraid to ask. "Why did it attack us? What does it want?" Raltis slowly lifted his arm, his fingers curling into a tight fist. "It wants you to understand. Humanity." He hissed the word like it was poison. "The Earth is not just a place. It is alive. And it wants you to feel its pain." The ship jolted again, this time stronger than before. A deep guttural growl echoed through the hull, resonating in the walls of the ship. It was a sound they couldn't place, one that seemed to shiver through their bones. The pursuer was closing in. Vectol looked out the viewport again, his eyes scanning the darkness of space, the black void now swirling with something unnatural. It was hard to tell, but there seemed to be more now. More creatures. More eyes. They were surrounding them. "We're not alone," Corin said under his breath, a shiver running down his spine. No one responded. Everyone felt it, the weight of something pressing in on them. Something waiting. Then the ship trembled. The crew looked at the monitors. There was something new. A signal, a pulse of energy, a wave of light coming from a spot directly ahead of them. It was growing. Vectol's mind raced. "It's a trap," he shouted. "They're leading us into it." But it was too late. A massive shockwave hit the ship with a force that sent everyone flying to the floor. The Varthuk screeched and shuddered, its systems failing one after another. The viewports cracked, and sparks flew from the electrical panels. The hum of the engines stopped, leaving only the eerie silence of space. Corin pulled himself up, staring at the chaos unfolding around them. "We need to fight back. We can't just sit here." But Vectol shook his head. "We're out of options. The ship's done. There's nothing we can do." Raltis suddenly stood, his body moving with unnatural speed, his glowing eyes locked on Vectol. "It's too late for escape. You will feel the consequences now. Humanity was never meant to be left alone. And you should never have tried to run." Before anyone could react, the entire ship jolted violently, and a terrible sound filled the air, like something was tearing through the ship's very core. The crew screamed. the lights flickering one last time. And then, complete darkness. The Varthuk was in chaos. Sparks erupted from the broken consoles, smoke filled the air, and the lights flickered weakly as if the ship itself was gasping for life. The crew, battered and bruised, struggled to stay on their feet, desperately trying to make sense of what was happening. Are we going to die here? Corin's voice trembled, his body shaking as the coldness of space seeped in through the damaged hull. Vectol stood silently, his claws gripping the ruined console. His mind raced, struggling to comprehend the gravity of their situation. The creature that had attacked them, the unnatural force that had invaded their ship, it wasn't just hunting them. It was connected to them. A shadow from the darkest parts of the universe. It wanted them. "Don't speak that," Vectol growled. His voice was low, but there was a fire in it. "We're not dead yet. We fight back, or we die trying." The crew rallied behind him, their fear giving way to determination. But Raltus, once their ally, stood apart, his eyes glowing fiercely. His body twitched as though he was no longer fully in control of himself. His mouth twisted into a strange, hollow smile. "The time for escape has passed," Raltus said in that otherworldly voice, a voice not his own. "Humanity will feel this. You cannot hide from what's coming." A deep, rumbling growl echoed from outside the ship. It was as though someone, was dragging its immense form closer to them. The Varthuk groaned under the pressure, its metal skin screeching as if it was alive, being bent and crushed by an unseen force. "Get him under control," Corin shouted, rushing toward Raltus. But as he approached, Raltus suddenly turned with lightning speed, his eyes blazing with a green, unnatural light. "No one controls me now," Raltus snarled. "I am the vessel for what is coming. You will all perish unless you understand. Earth is not just a world. It's a force of nature." The ship rocked violently again, throwing everyone off balance. Vectol growled in frustration. He could feel the gravity of their situation. The ship was done, but they weren't out of time yet. There had to be a way to fight back. There had to be a way to stop this creature before it destroyed everything. "Everyone to the weapons bay," Vectol commanded. "We can still defend ourselves. We have a chance." The crew, though terrified, moved quickly, following Vectol down the darkened hallways of the Varthuk. As they reached the weapons bay, they could feel it. The energy outside was building. The atmosphere had changed, thick with an oppressive force, as if something far beyond their comprehension was preparing to strike. Corin reached for a blaster, his hands shaking. "What if this isn't enough? What if we're too late?" "Then we go down fighting," Vectol said, his eyes burning with the fierce determination of someone who had faced death more times than he cared to count. No one touches Earth without paying the price. They grabbed their weapons, preparing for the worst. The air around them seemed to crackle with a strange energy. The crew could hear the whispers, no, the screams, echoing through the ship, growing louder. They were closing in. The enemy, the creature. It was here. "We don't know what we're facing," Corin muttered, holding his weapon tightly. "But we'll fight. For humanity. For Earth." The energy outside intensified, and suddenly, the Varthuk was shaken by a deafening explosion. The lights went out. The entire ship was plunged into darkness. Then, it happened. Through the viewport, a massive shadow appeared. It was huge, far too large for any one ship to handle. The entire galaxy had underestimated Earth, but now they were about to learn just how wrong they were. The pursuer had arrived. It wasn't just a creature, it was an entire army of them. Hundreds, thousands, all of them breathing in the power of the Earth itself. Corin felt a cold chill run down his spine. He was staring at a force the galaxy had never seen before. These weren't just enemies. These were forces of nature, powered by the very essence of the planet they sought to destroy. But Earth's defenders weren't done yet. Vectol raised his weapon, his voice steady. It's time to show them the strength of humanity. As the shadow grew larger, the crew took their positions, their hearts pounding in their chests. The battle had just begun. The fate of humanity was now in their hands. The crew of the Varthuk braced themselves. The entire ship shook under the weight of the incoming assault, and the lights flickered on and off, casting long, eerie shadows on the walls. Outside, the enemy's massive fleet filled the viewport, a growing blackness that stretched out into infinity. The full force of Earth's enemies was now in their sights. Vectol stood at the front, his eyes narrowed in determination. The enemy was here, and there was no turning back. It was the final battle. Their last chance. The fate of Earth hung in the balance. "Everyone, take your positions," Vectol barked, his voice firm. He could feel the cold sweat on his brow, his heart thumping with the weight of the moment. They had to fight. They had to hold on. Reltis, once a fierce ally, now stood in the center of the room, his form twisted by the power of the alien force. His eyes glowed with an unnatural light, as the whispers of the enemy seemed to speak directly into his mind. He was no longer the same. His body and mind were under the control of something far older and more powerful than anything the galaxy had ever seen. "You can't stop it," Reltis said, his voice distant and hollow. "The forces of nature are already in motion. You cannot fight what is coming." Vectol stepped forward, his claws twitching as he gripped his weapon tighter. "We will fight. Earth will never fall." As the enemy ships closed in, the Varthuk fired its first barrage. The enemy returned fire almost immediately. The explosions rocked the ship, but it held steady. For now. Vectol knew they couldn't survive long under this constant bombardment, but he refused to surrender. Not without a fight. Corin ran past Vectol, aiming for a nearby console to release the ship's stored energy reserves. "We need more firepower," he shouted over the roar of explosions. "If we don't break through their shields, we're done." "We don't have much time," Vectol growled, his eyes scanning the viewport. The sheer size of the enemy fleet was overwhelming. It was clear they were preparing to launch a full-scale invasion, and if they broke through the Varthuk's defenses, Earth would be next. "Get it done," Vectol ordered. The crew worked furiously, their hands flying over consoles, their faces set in grim determination. But even with their combined efforts, the ship was beginning to feel the strain. The hull groaned, and the lights flickered one last time before the room plunged into darkness. "Hold on," Corin yelled, his voice barely audible above the chaos. Then suddenly, the ship jolted as it fired a massive blast directly at the lead enemy vessel. The explosion sent a shockwave through space, shaking the Varthuk to its core. For a moment, it seemed like they had done the impossible. They had struck back. But just as quickly, the enemy responded, launching a new wave of ships. Vectol's heart sank. They couldn't keep up like this forever. The screen flickered again, revealing the largest ship of them all. Towering, terrifying, and impossibly powerful. It moved closer, and as it did, the very fabric of space seemed to warp around it. Reltis, his face twisted in agony, looked at Vectol with pleading eyes. "We can't win this. You can't fight the inevitable. Join us, and we can survive the end." Vectol turned to face his former comrade, his resolve hardening. "We don't run from our enemies. We fight until the end." With a final cry of defiance, he activated the ship's ultimate weapon, a massive pulse of energy that could destroy anything in its path. The crew braced themselves as the power surged through the ship, building to a terrifying crescendo. Outside, the vast enemy fleet watched in disbelief as the Varthuk released its weapon, a surge of raw, untamed energy that tore through space itself. The pulse shot forward like a bolt of lightning, striking the massive enemy vessel dead center. For a moment, everything stood still. The air was thick with anticipation. Then the explosion came. A shockwave of destruction rippled through the battlefield, and the enemy ship disintegrated in an instant, leaving only debris in its wake. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, Vectol allowed himself a fleeting moment of hope. "Keep firing," he roared. "We can win this." But as the battle raged on, it became clear that the tide was turning. The Varthuk's weapon had destroyed the largest enemy ship, but there were still countless others. And now, the enemy had a new weapon, a force more powerful than anything Vectol could imagine. The creature that had been controlling Reltis, the one that had twisted his mind, had begun to materialize on the battlefield. It was like nothing the crew had ever seen before. Its form was a blur of shifting shadows, a creature that defied logic. It was everywhere, and it was coming for them. Vectol stood tall, his claws outstretched, as he prepared for the final clash. "We fight until the end," he said, his voice unwavering. The final battle had begun, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance.